I'd like to welcome our main speaker for tonight, Lorelie.
Hi, my name is Lorelie, and I'm an alcoholic. And it just occurs to me every time I get up at the podium that, like, it's just so unrealistic to me, like that anyone would, think I could get up here and carry a message or do anything, productive or whatever. And it's just funny to me because when I was new in this program, and I remember that time very well, that I just could never, I just never knew that it would come to this, so to speak. So I want to thank Ramona for asking me to speak. She is one of my oldest friends in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I have a little anecdote that I always share, I think, from the podium about Ramona. It's a good one, too, so I will share it right now before I forget. When I had about 4 days sober at the Westside Alano Club, which is where we all got sober, I was too scared to come to the Marina Center. You guys had just too much pep. This place was intense. It was intense. People sat too close. People were like giddy with sobriety, and I was completely intimidated by it. And I stayed away from the Marina Center. Only if I was like dragged here by another person, would I come, or to the marathons and stuff at holidays. It was good. But anyway, so back to Ramona. So I had about 4 days sober, and I was sitting at the Westside Alano Club waiting for the meeting to begin. And she was such a great example for me of what a sober woman should look like, act like, talk like. Everything about her was grace and dignity and the steps. And she comes up to me, and she just like blows up like a little breath of wind, and she just hands me a format, and she goes, "Would you like to lead the meeting?" And I wasn't, my attitude had greatly improved even in 4 days. And but I still had this attitude like, I'm sorry, but I don't think you understand. I only have 4 days of sobriety. She was like, "Can you read?" She just leaves the format and then walked away. And so, that's the kind of example that I had set for me constantly at the Westside Alano Club, the people I met. It was all about, don't think about what you're doing or try to make some kind of judgment. Just do it. Just pick up those cups. Just dump those ashtrays. Don't worry about your financial problems. Don't worry about your family problems. Just come to a meeting, sit down, take a commitment, shut up, And I liked that. And I needed that kind of teaching, and I still do. And so thank you for setting a good example for me. And I want to welcome the newcomers, and I hope that you stay. I echo what Jennifer said. Basically, I hope you don't have to go out there again, but the Big Book does suggest that, we have to do whatever we need to do. And so, if you're lucky, this will be the last time for you, and you can stay here with us, and people in this room will help you learn how to live sober. And so congratulations for being here. And I want to thank Jennifer for carrying a very powerful message. And she is one of my favorite people in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's an honor to be her sponsor. And we really walk the path together. There is a period of time when she turns the following year, and I haven't yet. We're only a year and a half apart, and really we're traveling the path together. And when our siblings died, I really felt like that was a change had occurred in our relationship. And so, my job is to still carry the message and carry the torch, but I really feel like we're walking the path together. And I have a couple of anecdotes about Jennifer too. And so before I get too self-centered, well, I think it's too late for that. But before I get to talking about myself and all, I want to share those two anecdotes as well, because they're also a good example of AA. And I remember every once in a while, on a fairly regular basis, Jennifer and I meet at Cafe 50s, and we have breakfast on a weekend morning, and we talk, about our programs and our lives and how the program's working so good. Yay God, yay AA, and which is our motto basically. And so I remember that it was just a silly incident, but I had made it into a global issue. And basically, I had this piano that my parents had bought for me when I was about 9 years old, and that I've had forever. And it's old and beat up, and it's out of tune, and it was taking up space in our apartment that we needed for other things. And so I thought I should just give it away. And I thought, well, I'll give it to Claire. She's a nice girl. No, I'll give it to Claire, and then I'll feel good about it, because I felt like nostalgic, And Emmett Fox, if anyone reads Emmett Fox, says nostalgia is bad, just to summarize. But I was like attached to this piano, and it was, and I didn't want to give it away and all. And so we sat through breakfast, and I, said, well, one of the things on my plate today is that I'm going to give my piano away next week, and I've already called Claire and made the appointment, and I felt good when I did it, but now I'm feeling like, oh my God, I don't want to give the piano away, And so I was all worked up into a frenzy, and she was just listening very quietly to the whole blah, blah, blah. And at the end of it all, I paused so that she could insert her guidance. And what she said to me very calmly was, you don't have to give it away today. And I was like, how it's just so simple, but it's so profound. I was like, I don't? And I was like, wow, where'd you hear that? And she goes, you. So I was like, wow. And I called up Claire and I canceled that piano pickup. And I thought, what a great thing. I can do it next week. If I want, I'll call them back up and have them come back and get it again. I don't care if they think I'm crazy. It's just, and that has worked. That philosophy has worked many a time on things much greater than should I get rid of my piano. I don't have to make this decision today. And to me, that's part of the freedom that I get by being a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I definitely was not a free person when I got here. I felt like, just like the big book said, I was like, and I don't quote the big book, so I don't know. It's like I was a victim or a prisoner of the world and the people that were in it. The world and the people in the world had made me, desperate, bitter, miserable, and with no life. And that's how I felt. And that's not true. So anyway, when my sister passed away 2 years ago in July, of alcoholism. As soon as the shock wave kind of rolled over me after about 2 hours went by or whatever, I luckily I was right at the beginning of my our home group, Roxbury, Friday night. So I sat through that meeting, because my mom had just called me to tell me that my sister had died. And right after the meeting, I got home, and it's like I just knew that the first person I needed to call was Jennifer, because I knew that she and I almost had this thing that we would say to each other about we were waiting. We were waiting for the call. She was waiting for the call about her brother for years, and I was waiting for the call about my sister for years. And so I called her up, and I literally said on that voicemail, today I got the call about my sister. And she called me as soon as she got that message, and there was no one else in the whole world who could have understood. And she was very helpful to me. And the strange thing is that, 2 months later, then she called me and she said, and I got my call, and so then we've been walking the path together ever since. So Alcoholics Anonymous is an amazing program. I'm really sorry that my sister couldn't get it, but I heard a speaker recently at Roxbury who said that her 5-year-old nephew had passed away, and it was a very big tragedy for the family. And pretty soon after working the steps, she came to understand that just like when I was a kid, we were very strict at the dinner table, and my dad was really strict with manners. No elbow on the table, chew with your mouth closed, cut your meat and switch the fork over to the other hand, and when you're done eating, you must ask for permission to leave the table. May I please be excused could often be heard at my house. And this woman had said that what she learned after the whole thing with her nephew was that her nephew had been excused, but she had not been excused. And the important part of that, of course, was the second half, the part that said she had not been excused. For some reason we'll probably never understand, I'll never understand my sister was excused. I don't need to understand that today. What I do need to understand is that I have not been excused. I am still expected to be at that dinner table with my proper manners, and whatever needs to be done at that table, whatever God needs me to do in this life is what I'm here to do. Not sit around wondering why my sister died, why your brother died, why are children starving, on and on and on. Because I will have to drink because there are no answers. I don't have any answers to those things. I can manufacture a lot of insanity over it, but if I do, I'll have to drink. Excuse me, there's going to be a lot of coughing on that recording. Anyway, so the piano anecdote and the sister and brother anecdote. Okay, so welcome to the newcomers, and all that is done. So now I have to start talking about myself, my favorite subject. I'm really happy to be sober. I too love Alcoholics Anonymous, and I have a life today that, like we've heard a million times, I could never have designed this life that I have today for myself. I could have never chosen the things that God has chosen for me, but I'm just really, really lucky that I learned early on how to work the steps so that I can live the life that God has chosen for me today. And sobriety is not always an easy life to live, but is by far the best life I've ever had. And I think one of the most important parts of the steps is praying for God's will and then asking for the power to carry it out. The power to carry it out part that I always have a hard time with. That's always the most difficult part. I believe there's a God. I do believe that he's in my life today. I believe I would not be sober or doing anything, without God's power. So I have no problem with the praying for God's will part. I mean, sometimes I get like, okay, God, I pray for your will. And also, by the way, please keep everything exactly the way it is in my life right now. And of course, that's not really like praying for God's will, as we all know. But but then if I back off of that, I have really no problem with the pray for God's will part. The part I have a hard time with is the power to carry it out, and that's also what He's there for. God is there to also give me that power. I don't have it. If I had it, I wouldn't have to drink. I could drink. I wouldn't have to come to meetings. I was raised around here, and like Jennifer, I kind of had this belief that I was born wrong. I believe I was just waiting for a drink. I do believe, though, you do need alcohol to have an alcoholic. So, for a long, long time, I was just really stressed out waiting for that first drink. And like I had mentioned before, I came from a very strict home, and so there was no such thing as like sneaking out the window or the back door, like getting stoned or drunk with my friends and then coming home in that condition. I was deathly afraid of my dad. Even though he was a lovely man and he had a great sense of humor and all, he was very strict, and he would not hesitate to give me lecture number 254 and ground me. And when I was little, I got spankings and stuff like that. All that stuff that's not appropriate anymore. But I waited for a long, long time to have that first drink. And I do remember, my dad drank, and, based on my own alcoholism, I don't think he was an alcoholic, but somehow he drank every day and got away with it. But, he was a happy guy to begin with. He just got more happy when he drank. And I never saw any aberrant behavior or anything coming out of him. But I know that when I was a kid, I had aberrant behavior, huge. I was a very angry child, and I was angry like, if Barbie's dress wouldn't go on right, I'd just rip her head off, Then the dress would go on just fine, and she'd look a lot better than she had done before. I was a smasher and a breaker and a thrower. If something didn't go my way, I would throw it across the room. And of course, when you're like a kid and it's the 60s and your mom's reading the new psychology books about kids and all, that's kind of like a cool experiment. But that kind of behavior doesn't really sit well when you're a young lady in 20s or whatever, and you're working at your first job, or society expects you to act a certain way and you're acting, crazy. But I know that my parents had a really hard time managing me, and I can see why, because no one had the solution. No one knew I was an alcoholic. No one knew what to do with me. So it was just like a battle. And my parents were good people. I had a wonderful childhood. I think this is one of the most interesting things about my story and other people who have the same kind of story, where, I can't claim I'm from a broken home, or my dad beat me, or I wasn't loved enough, or anything like that. I had everything a kid could possibly want growing up. A mom and a dad that loved me. They were good looking. They were fun. They were like dancers, and they worked really hard. They both came from like dirt poor families, so they worked really, really hard to give my sister and I the stuff that they never had. We had food on the table, and I had clothes on my back, and I went to good schools. They tried to send me to private schools, so I could get a good education, which I'm still reaping the benefits of that to this day. We had a lovely home and a dog and a cat and all that good stuff. And we had a big family, too. I had like 20 people in this family. I had like 3 sets of grandparents. Like, that's another story for, I can't tell you the why, but I had 3 sets of grandparents, and like one grandma was a flapper, and she taught me how to play the ukulele, and it was fun. I had a fun childhood, and my parents both worked, so I was going around and around to all the grandparents all the time. They spoiled me rotten, and we had a great, great, great time. And so, why, when I was 18 years old, did I start to take that life and throw it down the toilet slowly but surely from drinking? I just couldn't answer that question, except when I opened the big book, I saw the answers were right there. And I realized that, it explained everything for me. It was such a relief when I opened the big book. It just explained everything I need to know, and it still does to this day. So, I remember feeling also, out of it, and never never belonging to this great family I had, and never, I was a bully on the playground, and I used to beat kids up all the time. And it's so funny is because now I'm so scared of that stuff. It's just like, alcohol really also made me a person with a mouth, like Jennifer was talking about. And so I'd go into the bar, and I'd pick the biggest guy, and I'd be like, you, what are you looking at? Yeah, you over there. And the poor bartenders, who, I was a pretty friendly person, and they would just have to protect me from getting the crap beat out of me all the time. And I was just unreasonable. And when I was 18, I went off to college, which my psychiatrist at the time told me would be a good thing for me, and it was the worst thing that could have possibly happened to me because I was out of control. And I did what a lot of kids do in their first year of college. I did experiment with drugs and do a lot of drinking and stuff like that. But the only thing is that these kids were doing that and then going to class the next day, whereas, any good alcoholic wouldn't let anything stand in the way of their drinking and using, and so I did not. And so I just never went to school. So my parents paid all this huge tuition, to send me to UC Santa Barbara, and the dorm fees and all the other fees that go with that. And they might as well just have written me a check and had me just put it in the toilet because it meant nothing that first year. Well, it started me off. It was my launching pad into my alcoholic drinking. And I remember my first experience similar to the one that Jennifer described, only I was like 16, my sister got married, and her wedding was just one big party for like 3 months, just pre-parties, after parties, the party itself. People were like doing Chinese fire drills, we came from the wedding to the reception, people were jumping out of the car and literally launching themselves into the air and landing on other people's cars, and it was, it was hysterical. These were party people, and so I got a chance to drink at the wedding too, and I'll never forget that I drank all day and drank all night. And then I laid on someone's bed to like rest, and I was doing this thing with my head like back and forth like this, and it was like spinning, and it was so much fun. And somebody caught me at it, and they came in to like use the restroom, and they go, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm just fine." But I just remember feeling free and like I can just do whatever and I don't care, and that is what drove me for the rest. I tried to chase that dragon or whatever you want to say for the next 12 years. And what happened is, when I was 22, am I going till 10 of 9, Ramona? Yeah. Okay. And so, is that the right? Okay. And so, who was paying attention? You were 22. Thank you. I was 22, and my father passed away from cancer, and it was devastating to me. I'll never forget when my mother told me across the kitchen table, "Your dad has like weeks to live." There's that denial, even, and it's like, what? It was like, well, no, that's just not going to happen. So when it did happen, I was just crushed. But I used that event, and alcohol was my friend then. It really came to my rescue because, when you're dealing with heavy-duty grief like that, alcohol worked really well for me because I drank, and then I could get really sad and cry when I couldn't cry before, and then I could get really angry at life and at the world for doing this to me, and then and then I wouldn't have to just crumble under the weight of the pain. And because my mom and I were totally different people. My dad and I, he and I were like cut from the same cloth, so I really felt like he was my big ally in the family, and even though he was strict and all, but he was a good guy, and I just loved him. And so I was just shocked. I didn't think this kind of thing could happen in the world. That's the kind of reaction I had to it, like, what? So I used that, though, as an excuse to drink and alienate myself from every person and every activity that a young woman in her 20s, could possibly partake in for the next 8 years. And it was what I was waiting for. It was the big event. Like a lot of people dream to be rock stars. Well, I dreamed to be a victim of, death. Like in my family. You don't know me, you don't know my pain. Don't try to understand me because you never will be able to. And I'm telling you, I wore that like a badge of honor. Get away from me. You don't know me, and you never will. And I am suffering more than any person on this planet, and I'm proud of that. And I'm going to milk it for everything that I can get out of it. Of course, none of those were conscious thoughts I had at the time. All of this is stuff that I can see now that I've worked the steps. But, I had a job, and I graduated college, and I had a job, and my boss was a drinker like me. So there was never any problem with calling in hungover and stuff like that. In fact, we would do cocaine off of the desk and stuff like that in our office. And so, that was good. It was fun. And then my grandma died when I was 26, and I inherited like $100,000. And boy, that's just the worst thing you could do with a 26-year-old alcoholic who has just gotten up the momentum that she needs to have a career and lifetime of drinking. It's $100,000 in my pocket. And so what I did is I went to my girlfriend's wedding in Atlanta, and I met this guy who I thought was very, very nice and worldly and all. And what happened was I moved back to LA and decided I want to live in the South. That's no surprise to an alcoholic. I like the South. I like the people. They're warm, they're friendly, they drink, they have no shoes. I love that. That Spanish moss hanging from the trees. I'll go and I'll write the great American novel, and this is what I really thought. I really thought this was going to happen to me. I was going to live out my dreams in the South. And I ended up moving to Florida. And this guy ended up turning out to be a drug dealer. And so, even that was a little too scary for me. And so I kind of parted ways or whatever and kind of tried to forge my own way in Florida. And I ended up moving to South Florida and trying to get a job. And I ended up working in a newspaper, which was fabulous. But, newspapering, I guess any career is a drinking career for an alcoholic, but newspapering is just notorious for its drunks in the newsroom, And so I worked at this newsroom, and there were all the drunks. And so we just drank, and we drank, and we drank. And I had silly thoughts like different alcohol produced different effects. So like if I had to drive home from the bar, I would drink vodka, because you could drive perfectly fine on vodka, no matter how many shots of vodka you had. And I like Stoli, and I would just shoot Stoli, and I'd just drive home just perfectly. And but if I was driving, I would never drink tequila, because if I really wanted to have a good time, I would shoot tequila, Cuervo Gold, because that made me violent, and just nothing better than that feeling of adrenaline that rushes through your veins when you just want to plant a big fist on someone's face. That to me was like the greatest feeling. I just love that. Because remember, Barbie's head and smashing, and I love that stuff. So, I really perceived that different alcohol, but if I just wanted to have like a mellow night, I would just drink wine. And I've heard women up to the podium call themselves winas, and so I was definitely a winette, because that's the thing beer made me like, full feeling. So if I drank wine all the time, all night long, that was kind of like my, the thing that I drank, And so anyway, I inherited that money. I moved to Florida. I became a newspaper editor, and it was fun. It was fun. I had somewhat fulfilled my dreams. But you know how these stories end. There is no way that I can, if I'm a true alcoholic in the sense that the Big Book talks about, there'll be no fulfilling of any dreams on a permanent basis unless I surrender to God and ask for Him, for His will for me, and get sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so it was just a temporary whim, and I enjoyed about 1.5 years of what I thought was success, and I thought, here I am, I have arrived. I bought a home on the water, and I had a Volvo, and I worked at a newspaper, and I couldn't think of anything better. The problem was that I drank more and more and more. My drinking started initially while I was at UCLA in college with a glass of wine with Shakespeare, and I thought that was so beautiful, so romantic, And it's just more and more and more alcohol produced. I used to also drink at the Orr House, which says a lot. I don't have to tell any more about that, except I loved the Orr House. And so when I went to Florida and I fell in with this crowd, and I saw these women initially, and they were, like I'd mentioned, running around with no shoes and straggly hair and beating each other up in these bars, and I'd never seen women beat up on each other, not even at the Orr House. And I looked down upon those women. I said, oh, please, I have a degree from UCLA. I am from north of Montana. I am just not, And within 1 year, I had no shoes, straggly hair, and I was beating the crap out of women in bars. And didn't take long. I loved those fisherman types and all their tattooed girlfriends, And one time I saw a guy beat another guy to death with a pool cue outside the bar that I drank in, and I thought that was cool. And sick. So I got the biggest drunk in town to move in with me. And then I'd start doing crazy things like picking up runaways behind the Walmart and letting them stay at my house. And so the sheriff's head would come and knock on the door. And because I was kind of a celebrity in the town, because I was the newspaper editor, the cop, the sheriff was knew me, and I used to publish the crimes in the area. And so he kind of let me go. But the parents wanted to have me thrown in jail, and I was just doing things that were I never really wanted to do. I never really pointed at that and went, I want to be white trash. I didn't really ask for that. But that's what happened. And meanwhile, drinking, and I used to buy Gallo wine. I forget. It had a cork. So maybe I haven't hit my bottom. But I remember it had a cork, because when you're drunk, trying to get that little cork tip to stick into the cork is really hard. You just have to have the right thing. But I drank myself out of that job as a newspaper editor, and boy, it was a great, great thing. My boss came into me one day and he goes, do you have a problem partying? And if I had said yes, I would have been working the first step, but I wasn't ready for that. And I said, oh, no, I'm just having a little bit hard time in my life right now. And so he said, okay, well, you're fired. And I was like, thanks. And out I went. And that was really good, because it really accelerated my drinking, because now I could drink all day long. And that's exactly what I did. And I sat on this old nasty couch in my living room, And I'm a cutter, and I would break bottles, and I would cut my arms and my legs because it felt good to do so. And then I would drink, and then I got the drunk dialies, as my other friend Lorelie, I get the drunk dialies, and I'd call people, and I'd forget it's 4 in the morning. And my mom started seeing a psychiatrist and started going to Al-Anon with my former boyfriend. And she said, I cannot take your calls anymore if you've been drinking. She goes, go ahead and try to call me, but if I can tell you've been drinking, I'm going to hang up. I was like, wow. Slowly, things began to get taken away from me. I got fired from that job. My mom stopped taking my calls because, I'm sorry, just like at that place downtown, I couldn't have an hour sober. I couldn't get sober enough to call my mom. I was drunk all the time. And I began to have hallucinations, and I began to have one of those strange schedules where you just pass out and wake up, and then pass out and wake up, and there was no, like, go to sleep at midnight and wake up at 8. I was sleeping whenever it was that I was passing out was when I was sleeping, and I was awake in the middle of the night whenever I was awake. And it was a nightmare, and it was hellish, and I never want to ever return to that. And I was physically ill, and I was like paranoid too. This is the really cool thing about it. It was like I was paranoid like I was a crackhead, but I didn't smoke any crack. I was going to my front window all the time, peeking out. I thought there was somebody trying to kill me. And there was somebody writing stuff on my car because it was so dirty, like, I'm going to kill you. And then I thought the person was going to kill me. And I saw Cape Fear, and I thought the guy was from Cape Fear was all, it was just, but it was all part of some sick thing in my mind that was enjoyable. So what happened was I woke up one morning, and I was trying to read, and the words were flying up off the page. And here's where I kick into the Karen Garrison mode. And I wanted with every fiber of my being, as you heard Jennifer say, to stop. I knew that alcohol was my problem, and yet every morning I'd walk to that fridge and I'd get that bottle of wine, and I couldn't understand that. I couldn't understand why I didn't want to drink, but I was drinking. I didn't want to drink, but I was drinking. I couldn't get that. I just thought, this is mad. This is fucked up. And then I was like, wow, this is really bad. And then I thought, oh, this is really scary. And for 1 second, one of those mornings, I realized that I would never, ever, ever, ever be able to stop drinking on my own power. I just knew. And then I was really scared. And I got this call from a guy I grew up with who had gotten sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was a strange phone call. It was my Eskimo call. It came out of nowhere, and he shouldn't have been calling me, but he was calling just to see how I was doing. And I told him everything. I just went, oh my God, like blah, 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 and he was like, are you willing to give up everything you have and everything you know about life in order to get sober? And the strange thing about that is that normally I would have just said, you know how we are, I was a liar, a cheat, and a thief. I would have been like, oh yeah, sure, I'll do whatever, But that's not how it hit me. That question hit me like a ton of bricks, and I just was paralyzed. And I realized the answer to that question was going to determine the rest of my life. But I didn't know what the answer was going to be. I didn't know if I could say yes or no. I just didn't know. And I sat there for a few minutes, and I looked around me, and there was blood all over the couch I was sitting on, and the place was a pigsty, and I had wild animals running around. I was in the same shirt and tank top tie-dye thing I'd had on for like 3 months. Because, by the way, I was too scared to get in the shower. That's how paranoid I was. So I hadn't showered, and I hadn't cleaned my house or anything. And I was able to say yes in that moment, and I see that moment as higher power working in my life. Because it wasn't me that said yes, I said yes, and then I just felt this immediate relief, like everything just got pulled out from under me, but it was okay. And for the next week, while I waited to get on a plane to come back to Los Angeles, I tried to go out and drink, because I was like, I'm going to stop drinking, I better drink all I can right now, every night. And I would go to the bar, and I'd order a beer, and I would take a few sips of it, and it was like, it didn't taste good to me. And it had nothing to do with guilt or shame or anything. It was like I could not choke down that beer. So I had already had some sort of spiritual experience. I had already had some sort of moment of clarity. And I thought that was weird. Like, oh, wait a minute. I really want that beer. And I can't drink it. It's like that guy in Constantine that tries to drink out of the bottles and nothing will come out. It was like very strange. And I arrived in Los Angeles, and my mother turned her home into a rehab. She hid all her alcohol. She put me up in a guest room with a very uncomfortable pull-out bed, and she started with up at 7 a.m., walk the dogs, clean the house, do my chores, help me take care of Grandma. My grandma was living in Mar Vista and kind of not so well, and it was like a regimen. And my first meeting was at Ohio Street on a Monday night, and the guy was so funny. He made me laugh so hard. And, those people are crazy over there. They were, like, sticking their hand out and pumping me down the line, and I was like, sponsor, sponsor, sponsor. And so then I started, like, with a little more relaxed attitude, started going to the West Side Alano Club, and I went to, like, 3 meetings a day for a long time. I had nothing better to do, because alcohol and alcoholism had beat me down to nothing. There was nothing that I could do in this world no job, no nothing, except just be of service a little bit and go to meetings. So I did. And here's what I heard. I heard 90 meetings in 90 days, get a sponsor and work the steps, get a commitment, and I always forget the fourth one. Read the big book. That's what it is. And I did do that. I did. I did all those things because I was desperate. I was so desperate. But see, it was also my higher power opening up my mind. I guess I wasn't talking myself out of anything. I was like, yeah, I'll do that, I'll do that, I'll do that, I'll do that. I was just weird. And, I can't even, exercise regularly for 3 weeks at a time. I mean, I've never been able to do that. Willpower does not work on my life. And so it was spiritually inspired. I just did everything I was told. I got this great chip commitment. I always talk about it. Remember Joey Haslam was the secretary, and he used to wear his wife beater, and he had all these tattoos everywhere, and it was Wednesday night Alano Club. It's all these tattooed people, and their beautiful girlfriends, and these girls were like right out of a magazine. These guys were all big with their tats and everything, and it was just this crazy meeting, standing room only, and I was like the only nerd there. I was like, ooh. But I had the chip commitment. And I had that commitment for a year. I mean, it was like, if you don't even get in my way, if it was Wednesday night and I was trying to get to the Westside Alano Club, I was like, oh, don't you understand? I have a quick chip commitment. And I'd sit there and I'd have my little chips and I'd give them out. And I noticed that I was constantly refilling the newcomer chips and the 30-day chips and maybe a 60-day chip here and there. But that the 6-month and 9-month chips just stayed at their level, ever gave any away. And that was a very important lesson for me. A lot of people come into Alcoholics Anonymous, not a lot of people stay. And that's not because the people are bad or AA is bad. It's just the statistics are pretty grim. So if you're here already, you have a much higher chance of staying sober if you just stay and don't try to go out there again. But anyway, so at the end of that commitment, the year was up, and I didn't really want to give it up, but, it's a tradition, so it's a rollover. And they said, well, who wants to take the chip commitment? And there was this little girl sitting across the table from me. She was very young. She had short cropped, white blonde hair, and she was like this little heroin addict. And she was just shaking, and she was sick and sweaty and just a mess. But she had been coming, the last couple of weeks to this meeting. And, the room was quiet and dark, and we're looking around for my replacement, and this little girl stuck her little hand up in that dark room, little shaky hand, and said, I'll take that commitment. And I pushed those chips across that table at her, and I just felt like if she could just do what I had been doing, if she could just show up with that box of chips every Wednesday night, that she might stay sober like I had. And I just felt like I was just getting it, I just felt like that was so important. And I got a sponsor right away, and she worked the steps with me at 60 days. And I was not all that clear-headed, but enough to work the steps and get a program going. And she was a big person of service. She also taught me that written 10th step that you heard Jennifer talk about, which I still do to this day. And a lot of people that we know that got sober around that time, work this written 10th step, and it's just fabulous. And, she wanted me to call her every day, and she sent me this guy named George who taught us all this kind of quantum meditation. And so the meditation part of the 11th step was not an issue for me. I had meditated right off the bat. It was very hard to do it, but this guy George is awesome. He just said, don't worry about it. You just try to do it every day. And I just got this full education right from the get-go. But the thing is that I could never have stayed here if God had not been, wanting me to stay. And my sponsor used to tell me, pray for willingness. And then she would say, if you're not willing to pray for willingness, then pray for the willingness to be willing, And I would literally sit on my knees at night, every night, and I go, God, please make me willing to be willing to be willing. Willing to be willing to be willing, And I used to lay in my bed for the first 90 days. I cried myself to sleep every night because I thought, what have I done? What is going to become of me? What the hell is going on? And I was just so worried about everything. And then one night I went out with a group of people. We went out dancing because you know how fun it is to learn how to have fun in sobriety. Woo, I can go out dancing without drinking. Wow, what a concept. And I came back from that night. It was late. It was like my late night out. And I came back and my mom had this bathroom with this big vanity and a big mirror, and you have to walk through it before you get to the bed. And so I was walking through the little vanity area, and I just took a quick look because you know how girls are. And I took a quick look at the mirror. And what I saw someone in the mirror who was not necessarily a stranger to me, but it was a woman that I'd never seen before. And she was looking out from that mirror at me with this most powerful spiritual stuff coming shooting out of her eyes at me. She was looking right at me. And when I looked back, she wasn't gone. It wasn't like a fleeting thing I saw for a second. There was another woman looking out the mirror at me. And she was a woman of dignity and grace, and she was pretty, and she was calm, and she had power. She knew, she had a confidence about her that I just had never seen before. And she didn't actually mouth words to me, but she looked out at that mirror at me and she says, "You don't need alcohol anymore." And it was like, I practically fell on the ground. And it was like, from that point on, I never wasted any time in Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't need any more experiments. I didn't need any more proof. That was all I needed to know. And here's what's happened since. Here's the 2-minute version. Everything that could possibly happen in a life has happened to me. I went back to school. I didn't get just 1 degree. I got 2, because that's how we are. More is better, right? I got 2 degrees. I used to scoff at people who went back to school. Oh, get off the podium. And then I was going back to school, and I got 2 degrees, and then I made good use of them. I went and I got a job, at a school, and then I made my job more important than my program. And then I began to work more than I prayed. And then what happened is I got fired from that job. Because God is like that, He was like, "Excuse me, yeah." And then I learned something really, really important. You put AA first and God first, or, the deal is off, And so that was a very important lesson. And so then I began to pray like the desperate, because I realized I was still just as desperate as when I came in, because I'm still an alcoholic and I'm still only 1 day away from my drink, my first drink. And at one of my first meetings, my first year of sobriety, I met this guy. He came into the room, this dark room of Westside Lano Club, and he had white shoes on. It was January. He had shorts and a Hawaiian shirt on. Anyone know who I'm talking about? And he was working the room. Like, people were like, "Woo!" They were in the wave in there. "Steve, woo!" And I was like, "What?" And he was pumping, and people were so happy to see him. And I go, "Who is this guy?" And so I get up at the podium one day, and I'm like whining about my feelings and like, "My mommy, my daddy, la la la." And then I got down, and then he got up right behind me. He goes, "This is not Feelings Anonymous," like that. And I was like, and I couldn't like share for 3 months at any meeting anywhere. I was like, I might share about my feelings, and that's wrong, So then I see him, and I go, I'm going to tell that guy I have a resentment against him. I'm just going to lay it all down, So I see him, and I go, "Hey, I have a resentment against you, and I think I should talk to you about it." And so I go, and I get ready to tell the whole story, and he goes, "If you have a resentment, you need to write about it and call your sponsor. Bye-bye." And then he just like left. And I was like, oh my God, I hate you. So like a week later, he asked me to go on a panel, and I was like, "Yeah, I'll go on your panel. Yeah, I'll show you. I'm not going to talk about my feelings either. How about that?" So we go on this panel, and I find out that, he's read more books than me. He loves movies. And we were looking at a full moon one night, and sorry, I hope you don't mind if I do this, but he quoted that line from that Wolfman movie from the 30s, "Even a man who is pure at heart and says his prayers by night can become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright." And I was like this, "I love you." And so, that's it. And what we wanted was we wanted a companion who loved Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was that person for him, and he was that person for me. And so against a better judgment and all odds and all that kind of stuff, it was like boy meets girl on AA campus, and we fell madly in love. And that was 12 years ago. And we were lucky enough to be married 5 years ago, And the only reason why that is because we both work a program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we stay out of each other's program. So, I have a great life today. I've been at my job 8 years. People trust me. What happens when you do really well is people ask you to do more. And so I have a trusted position at my job, but I have to work a program in order to be of service there. And I have a great marriage, and I have great sponsorees, and I've been blessed with a full life. And the more I stay sober, the more full it gets. And that's the trick, because the more full it gets, the more I have to ask God to help me, and the more I have to work those steps. So I'm a very grateful alcoholic, and thanks for letting me share.